So, welcome back to the second session on brain-based learning. In our previous session, we talked about the core principles of brain-based learning. We also discussed how as teachers it is of importance to us how we can make use of the understanding of brain-based learning, how the brain learns to make our classrooms more effective. Today what we are going to discuss is that we are going to look at the theorists, the scientists who actually worked on the brain, who worked on what the brain does, how it functions, the structural differences that come up in the brain when they respond or when the brain responds or reacts to certain environment, and how this enriches or depletes the brain cells, how the dendrites, which are key to learning within the brain, how they respond or they react to the environment and the various simulations and situations that are created for them. We start off by looking at Marion Diamond, one of the earliest scientists who worked on neuroanatomy. She worked on animals actually, and her take was that there is a structural difference that can be detected in the cerebral cortex of animals when they are exposed to different levels of stimulation in the environment. What she found is that young animals, when they are placed in an enriched environment, they actually show a stronger development of the brain. The brain within the brain cells, they become really enriched, which makes the brain development better, stronger. What Diamond actually did was she worked with animals at different age groups. She started off by working with animals which were weaned and put these animals in a very enriched, in a very positive environment to see how the brain is affected. And there the detection or the finding was that these animals developed measurable changes in the cortical morphology. The cortex actually got affected positively. They moved on to looking at animals that were not even weaned, much younger animals. Again, the response or the finding was that a positive environment with a very, very positive stimulation helped the dendrites become stronger. The question then was, does this impact only growing animals, or is this impact seen even in adults? The experiment moved on to looking at adults or older animals, animals of a higher age, and again the impact was similar. What it says to us is that unlike those animals who are brought up, who are raised in an impoverished environment where there is a lack of affection, there is a lack of positivity, then compared to the animals that are in a very positive, in an enriched environment, we find that the two kinds of animals, these two study groups show different levels of brain growth. Very, very important for us as academicians, as educationists, as teachers is to understand that our students who come to us, they come from various environments. When they reach the classroom or when they reach us, we need to be sensitive and mindful of this to know and to understand that it's not a barrier really. Even if they come from heterogeneous backgrounds, they come from environments which are different from each other. Their brain development would have been at different levels. There is always a scope to nurture them, create an environment which will help them to actually thicken those dendrites, which help the cortex region to become stronger, more powerful, and therefore more open to learning. Let's look at the next person who came in, and we will look at now Howard Gardner. Why are we bringing in Gardner into the brain-based learning session? Because Gardner says that every type of intelligence is very closely related to what happens in the brain. The chemical changes that come inside the brain, different aspects, different parts of the brain that get impacted or that function, that are active based on the intelligence that the individual brings in. So, the different intelligences that he brings in are, musical intelligence, linguistic intelligence, logical, mathematical intelligence, spatial intelligence, or interpersonal intelligence, and so on. So, he actually brought in these 8 intelligences, to which interestingly he added what is called the existential intelligence and also the pedagogical intelligence. Of course, that is where we come in. As teachers or as instructors, facilitators, educationists, we do have what is called the pedagogical intelligence, right? When we look at these intelligences, we find that, for example, linguistic intelligence. The linguistic intelligence is typically found in the left temporal and frontal lobes. Let's look at what is there in the logical and mathematical intelligence. We notice that it's the left frontal and the right parietal lobes where we find this intelligence working in, and so on. I would not go in detail. When you go back to your e-learning lessons, you will find a detailed explanation on what Howard Gardner has done, what are the different intelligences, and how it has impacted, or how we can make use of that in a classroom, especially when we are designing our materials and when we are bringing in various ways of inculcating learning in the classroom. So, let us take a simple activity like reading from a printed material. Let us say there is some print in front of us and we are just reading from that. It is a simple activity, right? But this simple activity, when we look into the brain, what happens inside is a very complex process that goes on. The complex process of actually the eye reading or seeing the word on the page, that particular sensation getting registered primarily in the visual area. Then this word which is seen in the visual area gets related to the next level where it is understood as a particular word, and then that word is articulated. The complex process that goes in the simple act of actually just seeing a word and then speaking it out tells us that the brain is constantly in a complex process. It's making use of its various features again and again and again in a complex process to bring about a whole aspect of communication, to register what's available outside, to take it back into the brain, to decode it, and then to send it back. In simple terms, it takes in the input, it encodes that input, puts it back there for the brain to understand it, and then decode it so that the output is shared with the audience. We need to keep these things in mind when we are working with students and when we are working with learners who come from varied backgrounds, who come with multiple intelligences. For example, if I am somebody who is very, very pro-linguistic intelligence, that is predominantly my intelligence functions with linguistics, that is language related, then if I am put in an environment where the musical intelligence is honed, I may not respond very positively. I may still respond, but I may not be as effective, and vice versa, and that is something that we need to keep in mind. We move on to the next theorist who came in, and two of them who are called the Canaan Canes brain-based learning. So, let us look at Canaan Canes principle, which is a very robust principle that has come up. They have worked on research in various areas, as I said, including cognitive psychology, sociology, philosophy, education, even sports psychology, and also creativity research. They have found that human beings, they call, are living systems, and based on this they have built these 12 principles, and let's spend some time on that and see what exactly are they talking about. To start with, the very first principle that they bring in is that all learning is physiological. When we say all learning is physiological, what exactly are we talking about? We are saying that every little learning that happens, there is a physiological change that happens in the brain that is related to the whole body. And therefore one needs to look at what kind of setup, what kind of situation, and what kind of environment we are bringing in when we talk about learning. They say that the brain and mind is social, and therefore we observe that children learn better when they are in a group rather than when they are learning in isolation, when they are able to participate in group activities, when they are able to actually learn from each other. The second thing they say is that the search for meaning is innate in the brain, which means that the brain does not work in isolation. The brain does not function really well with rote learning or learning something to which it cannot form a meaning, which it cannot give a meaning to. Therefore, constantly the brain is creating patterns and learning in the process. We need to keep that in mind. The fourth one that they say therefore is that this search for meaning occurs through patterning. As I said just now, meaning is innate. The brain is constantly endeavoring to look for meanings, create meanings, and it does it through patterns. Therefore, repetition or a particular behavior or a particular input, if it is repeated and then we see its implementation, the repetition of this particular aspect helps us to create a pattern, and this pattern formation makes the meaning become stronger and stronger. And as we said in the earlier session, the brain, the learning is physiological, so the dendrites become thicker, making this learning even more powerful. The fifth part that they say is, when this patterning happens based on emotions. Emotions are very, very critical to patterning. When we say emotions are critical to patterning, what exactly do we mean? So one can look at how one creates positive emotion in the classroom, how one creates a happy environment in the classroom, whereby the emotions are not depleting. Imagine if you and I were sitting in a Dickinsonian classroom where we have an Oliver Twist sitting in there, the fear of being caned, the fear of being punished, the fear of, taking away rewards, which is as basic as food. Definitely the learning that happens over there is a very impoverished learning. Vis-a-vis an environment where there is a lot of camaraderie, there is a very positive environment with positive reinforcement happening from the teacher, creates a much more positive learning situation. What happens again is very important, which they have brought out, is that why do we require to do all these things? Because the brain does not learn just in part. Learn